When someone you love just disappears, it messes with your entire life. For me, it was my 13-year-old brother, David. I loved my older brother so much. We were living in a small farm town in the Pennsylvania countryside. At that time, we were living in one of the oldest houses in town. Our house was built sometime in the late 1700s. On the night he went missing, I remember my parents weren't home that night for whatever reason. But back in the 80s, it was considered okay to leave your kids home alone. Me and my brother were both sitting on the floor in the living room, listening to the radio broadcast. My brother asked me to fill him a glass of Hawaiian punch. After I went to the kitchen and poured him a glass, he had completely vanished from the living room. I remember that exact moment as clear as day. I thought he was playing a trick on me. I played along, but when I searched every room in that damn house, not a hair was out of place. He couldn't have gone outside because I was by the front door the whole time, and the windows were sealed shut, since by the previous owner. The basement door in the living room was wide open, the only place he could have gone. When I left to fill up his drink, it was shut. I was horrified of the basement as a kid because there's no electricity down there, and it literally looked like a dungeon. I yelled his name from the top of the stairs countless times, but he never answered. Even though I was 11, that basement still scared me. I remember that night, sobbing uncontrollably, and when my parents finally pulled into the driveway the next morning, I was still in tears when I told them about David. Mom and Dad checked the whole house. I then told Dad about how the basement door was wide open, and when he walked down into the basement, I remember sitting on the couch next to the basement door, hoping my dad would walk back up with David. But when Dad walked up those stairs, his face had gone completely pale. In his hands were my brother's clothes from the night before. I can't describe how horrified I was. He dropped them onto the ground and walked upstairs to where Mom was. I then got on the ground and crawled toward the clothes. Exactly what my brother was wearing before he disappeared. I sorted through them. Everything he wore that night, shirt, pants, underwear, socks, everything stripped from him. I could hear my parents' voices from upstairs. My mother then came sprinting down the stairs and got on the phone with the police. My dad ran outside and into the field. When the police finally arrived, the entire police team thought he must have gone outside and got lost in the nearby forest. But I knew for a fact he was in that house. The police officers spent weeks searching the woods and fields near our house. The police checked the basement but said there was nothing. They closed the case about a half a year later. The entire town assumed it was a kidnapping. I knew it was something to do with that basement, but I could never get myself to go down there. After his disappearance, life continued for our family. We turned David's bedroom into a guest bedroom. I hated how my parents did that. It felt like they were trying to move on. I was unable to. Losing David was a huge damper over my entire family, something that would hang over our heads our entire lives. Mom's way of coping with the grief was just erasing all memory of him. I hated her guts for that. Every time I looked at that basement door growing up, I could feel something behind it. I remember one day when I was 16, I was putting DVDs away in the living room. I was sitting a few feet away from that door and I smelt something familiar. The smell was seeping through the cracks of the door. It was what my brother smelled like. I got up and nearly ripped that door off the hinges. I ran downstairs into the darkness. The entire room smelled like David's old bedroom. It was pitch black, but I knew he was in there. I started screaming his name. I screamed his name for hours until Dad finally came down. Dad couldn't smell it. He thought I was insane. I remember I couldn't talk for weeks after that. Nowadays, the 30-year anniversary of David's disappearance is rolling around. I can say it's been a long 30 years without him. I'm now living alone an hour or so away from my childhood town. I had to get out of there as soon as possible. When I turned 18, I started looking toward apartments in town, and by my 20th birthday, I was out the door. My parents continued to live in that house. My mom developed stage 3 breast cancer about 3 years ago and was forced into a group home closer to the hospital. My father was given the option to move with her and sell the home, but he decided to stay there and continue farming. My mother and father had a tough relationship ever since I left the house, so Dad didn't mind the quiet. Later on, my dad fell off his tractor and broke his knee, and is now unable to walk without a cane. He then moved in with Mom, then sold me the land for free and insisted that I moved back into that house. I wanted nothing to do with that house. I had to pay taxes for that house on top of my own taxes. I then allowed tenants move in. They were a young couple, late 20s. Of course, my stubborn old man was angry with me for letting a desperate couple live in the vacant house. They've been living in that house for almost a year now, and they called me up last week complaining about a decaying smell coming from the basement. By that time, I had learned to adapt from David's death. I told them I'd check it out the next morning. That was the biggest mistake of my life. I woke up early the next morning and drove to the house. It felt odd driving back there. Those fields, it all felt so familiar. I tried not to think about how scared I was of that basement growing up. Fortunately, my dad finally added electricity down in the basement. I pulled into the driveway. They were both waiting outside for me. They said it smelt like something was rotting down there. I had everything I'd be needing: asbestos masks, medical gloves, eye protection. I worked as an air duct cleaner a few years ago, so I have some background knowledge. I walked into the house and headed for the basement door. I never seen what it actually looked like down there until now. I opened the door and could immediately smell it. Something was rotting in there. I turned on the light switch. Ahead of me was an empty room. It was small, looked to be about 15 by 10 feet big. This basement had been haunting me for all these years. Seeing it with the lights on felt off. The walls were stone, except for one. One of the walls stood out. It was wood instead of stone. The smell was clearly coming from the wood. The wood was rotting. I walked over and I thought the best idea would be just to tear the whole wall down. I started tearing pieces of rotten wood off the walls. Light started to seep into the other side. There was a secret room in the basement. I stopped, and in front of me I saw what looked like human flesh. I couldn't describe how horrified I was. I would rather go to hell than relive that terrible moment. I started smashing that wall with all the force in my body until it finally gave in. The creature in front of me, just the sight of it made me want to claw my eyes out. It was in a fetal position. The skin wasn't pale, it was white, and it looked like the flesh had been melted to the bones. The fingernails and toenails stretched halfway across the room. The worst part was that it wasn't dead. It was breathing. It was alive. "David?" I said in a terrified voice. It slowly lifted its head and looked at me. The face looked completely mutated, but those eyes were my brother's eyes. It tried to speak. It tried with everything in it. That thing was my brother David. I had so many questions. How was he alive? What did he eat? How could he breathe? What the fuck happened? I kept the questions to myself. That was my brother in that basement. This whole time he's been in that fucking basement. I didn't say another word to him. I ran upstairs and out to my car. I opened up my glove box and grabbed my gun. By the time I got downstairs, David had stood up, dragging his long nails behind him. "Julian," he growled. I then shot him in the head. At the top of the stairs were the tenants questioning the gunshot. They walked down the stairs to investigate. By the time I heard them scream, I was already out the door and backing out of their driveway. I didn't shoot David because I was scared of him. I shot him because of how awful the situation was. That was 2 days ago. I've been driving ever since. The only time I stopped was to fill my gas tank. I don't know where the hell I am. Last time I checked, it said I was in Kansas. I don't know what to do. Should I join Davis in the afterlife, or should I try to move on? The most sickening thing is not knowing what happened. What the fuck happened? I keep asking myself, what the hell happened? The circle of forest is just that, a circle. About $750 mm in diameter, it's not particularly big. It is ringed by 2 meters of grassless rock, and then beyond that is the wilderness. Moss and fern and cliff and weeds. The trees and plants that grow inside the circle are thick and strange. It's raining this evening. I sit in my little hut with a mug of warm tea as the rain batters and clatters against the roof. It leaks through in one corner and drips quickly down into a bucket I've placed there. My rifle rests against my leg. My hut has a direct view to the centerpiece of the forest. A dark, cave-like hole in the middle of a clearing, descending down and into the unknown. I tried to go through it once, but my head began to pound the deeper I went down. To the point of agony, actually, and I was forced to retreat. I don't go down there anymore. Not much point to it. My colleague joins me tonight. He sips from a mug of his own. "Ah," he says with a pleasant smile. "Delicious. Nothing like a warm mug on a cold day." "Mm-hmm," I reply, scratching my beard. "What do you think might be coming up tonight?" he asks. "Who could tell? Nothing, hopefully. It's been a while since the last one," he murmurs. "We're overdue a visitor." Yes, I suppose we are," I sigh. Visitor is darkly comical way to refer to the things that clamber out of the hole, coined because of how crushingly lonely it can get at this particular station. I've been here for 3 months now, another 3 to go. But of course I have Robbie here with me tonight, someone to talk to. I've missed him. The rain splashes through the leaves and into the undergrowth, and I take a final sip before setting the mug down onto the wooden little table with a low thunk. I rise to my feet. "Right. Let's head a little closer, shall we?" He mutters, glancing out the doorway. "Into the rain?" "You know it, brother." He sighs. "Fine. Are we splitting up or sticking together this time?" It's a no-brainer. "We'll stick together," I tell him. I clap him on the shoulder and gesture for the man to head outside. "You know how I get lonely." He chuckles. "Right you are, man." And out he goes, rifle in hand. I hoist up my own and out I go, the water splashing against my hood and my shoulders as we push through the undergrowth and a little closer towards the hole. The reason for this little pursuit outdoors is the rain itself. It is, unfortunately, obscuring our view, and whilst on a clear day, I might be content to just sit in the hut and wait for one of the sensors to trigger. I also don't fully trust the sensor's effectiveness in such weather. So, out we go. The ferns brush up against my camo-clad legs as we approach the clearing, and we take our positions beside the best lookout trees. Robbie is a little off, though. "Hey," I say to him, above the rush of the rain. He looks at me. "Wake up, man, you can be seen from there, back up a little." He chuckles and rubs his head. "Of course, right you are." We settle down and we wait and we watch, as water pools and puddles around the hole in the ground ahead. It's surrounded by tumbled rock and stone, though I couldn't say where from. There isn't another rock of such size in the whole circle of forest. Perhaps someone moved them there, long, long ago. It's another 20 minutes before anything stirs from the hole. Robbie and I just spend the time shooting the shit. "I just think you'd be so much happier if you quit this business, man," Robbie says to me. "Being isolated for such long periods of time. It's not healthy. How long you got left?" 3 months, I tell him. "So 6 months total. Half a year in such a place as this?" Robbie shakes his head. "You need to be around people. Humans are social creatures." "Perhaps," I grunt. Robbie opens his mouth to say more, but I cut him off with a quick gesture, pointing to the hole. We both creep a little lower in our positions and watch as a shadow begins to shamble its way from the depths of the hole. The thing is covered in slime and chatters as it appears, armored, brown and disgusting. 2 tiny beady eyes peer out as its antennae twitch and circle around. Its rows upon rows of sharp legs clatter over the rock and slice down into the wet grass and the mud. I feel a swell of revulsion rise up in my stomach, but it's okay. These types are always the easiest. I raise my rifle, Robbie does likewise, and the abomination is riddled with quick holes, its shell and flesh bursting out into the undergrowth as it screeches in fury. I suppress a gag. "Disgusting," Robbie mutters. "Where the hell do these things even come from?" I don't bother responding. It's a question we've asked each other countless times over the years. I have my theories. From amidst the ruin of the centipede-like creature and out from the hole comes a deer. It raises its head and sniffs the air. I raise the rifle, and the deer bolts, bouncing and speeding away over the undergrowth. "Fuck!" I shout, hesitating as I look between the deer and my colleague. I point at him. "Watch the damned hole. I'll be back." Yeah, chance would be a fine thing, but the deer is the priority for now. I take off between the trees after it. I raise the gun and fire, exploding a branch as I do so. The deer still hops speedily away. They aren't usually this fast, these things. I stumble after it, leaping over ferns and bushes, and the deer makes the mistake of turning sideways to try and ack away from me. I take the opportunity to raise the rifle to my shoulder, firing again, with a better chance of hitting, and this time I strike. Black fluid bursts from the deer's side, and a strangled, decidedly non-deer-like noises escapes its throat as it crashes down to the ground with a rustle of ferns. I wipe the rain and sweat from my forehead and turn instantly back, chest rising and falling as I hastily return to the clearing. I approach from the opposite side this time and I raise a hand to Robbie. But, just as I expected, the man isn't looking. His interest is elsewhere, staring off into the woods. He rises to his feet. "Robbie!" I shout at him, and he swivels to look at me. "Were you watching the hole?" The man does not respond, and movement at the clearing's edge catches both our attentions. An anxious-looking man with a backpack and waterproof trousers shuffles out from between the trees, a crumpled map in one hand. Hello," he says, looking between Robbie and I. I raise my rifle at once, and Robbie does likewise. I begin making my way around the clearing's edge towards my colleague, barrel of the weapon fixed carefully on the stranger. "What? Hey," he says in alarm, putting up his hands. "I don't understand. You guys are rangers, right? I'm not a poacher or anything like that." He forces out an awkward laugh. "I'm just lost, honestly. I'm literally lost." "Where are you from?" I ask him. I'm sorry," the man replies, adjusting his glasses. "I didn't realize I had an accent." A poor attempt at a joke. Another weak laugh. "Tell me where you're from right now or I'll blow your head off," I tell the stranger plainly as I reach my position beside Robbie. "Speak clearly." I'm from Obdebrand," the man mutters. "What?" I reply, jerking the rifle. "I said speak clearly." Obdebrand," the man replies, raising his voice, the terror in his face quite evident. "That isn't a real place," I tell him. "What country?" I don't... What damned country? This country, obviously. Please, this isn't funny, just let me go, alright? I'll find my own way. Please. I exchange a look with Robbie. "Tell me the name of any country, hiker. That's all I want to know." The man shakes where he stands as the rain pours down through the trees. He stutters and mutters, and eventually he manages to speak, though his words are a string of nonsense. I take quick aim and pull the trigger, and a hole appears in the center of the man's forehead. He drops like a brick as black fluid bursts and spurts from his face, his skin twitching and crawling as a massive insect-like leg bursts from his ribcage. I spit onto the ground. "Jesus," Robbie murmurs. I consider chiding the man for allowing the creature through, but there's no point, really. So I let it go. The corpse twitches in the grass beneath the rain. "Obdebrand," Robbie repeats. "Do you think it's a real place? Or did he just make it up? A random combination of sounds?" "Who can say, man?" I reply, shrugging. "Your guess is as good as mine." Robbie says nothing further. We sit side by side and watch the hole for another 30 minutes. We are quieter this time, but still, it's nice just to have his company. The rain falls. "I gotta take a piss, man," Robbie says, breaking the silence. He clambers to his feet. "Hey, well, don't go too far, just piss right there." "Eh? I need you alert and active, my man. Just piss right there." Robbie hesitates and gives me a look before shaking his head. "All right, man. I'll try not to turn around too fast. Wouldn't want to hit you with my dick and knock you out." I chuckle as he relieves himself against the tree, a chuckle which is quickly lost as a horde of shadowy beings begins scampering out of the hole. "Action, Robbie!" I tell him. "Quick, stay alert." The shadowy beings quickly take shape through the rain. They are all exact copies of myself. They don't make a break for the exit, they run to me. "Soldier!" One of the copies shouts into my face, grabbing me by the shoulders. "Jesus, thank God, you're alive." "Right, come with us immediately. There's still time to get you to safety." I shove him away and raise the rifle. My copy stares at the barrel, then at me, and then swears and throws out his hands. "Again? For fuck's sake, why does he keep doing this?" He turns to another of my copies and gives him a light shove in the chest. "Why won't he just come back? What are we doing wrong?" I choose not to partake in this little piece of theater. I take aim and fire, bursting a hole in my copy's neck. Initially, the blood is red, which is rather worrying, but it quickly runs black as he falls gasping to the floor. The other copies of myself all retreat in panic. There are 5 more of them. "Robbie," one of them shouts, gesturing to my colleague. "Tell him to come back already. We can't keep doing this." Robbie stutters and mutters, and I fire. The copy's head bursts open. Down he goes. 2 of the surviving copies attempt a hasty escape. Back to the hole, which I find interesting, but not interesting enough to spare them. Down they go, one after the other. Bang! Bang! 2 left now. They look at each other, and the closest holds out a hand to me. "Listen," he says carefully as I reload. "I know this seems impossible and scary." He's right. I'm fucking terrified, though I'm doing my best not to show it. These things really are getting creative. But you have to trust us on this, or at least hear us out, please. Do you have any idea how long you've been gone? The other copy shouts in anger. "He's not going to listen, it's just like last time." The closest copy stares right into my eyes. "I don't care what the others say," he tells me. "I will never leave you behind. I swore it once, and it's a promise I intend to..." Bang. I blow the imposter to kingdom come. His comrade panics and slips on the wet grass as he tries to run, and I gun him down. His lifeless body thuds to the ground, his skin twitching in various and unsettling places, as if being pressed or stretched from the inside. I put a couple of bonus bullets in him for good measure. Robbie looks over to me and studies my face. "Are you good, man?" he asks after a moment. "Yeah," I reply, lying. "Yep." I stare at the faces of my copies. Corpses now. I try not to dwell on it. I glance over to Robbie. Perhaps I've let this little charade go on for too long. Robbie pales and stares right past me at the hole. I turn to follow his gaze. 3 figures clamber out, one waving a white flag. "Wait!" one calls above the roar of the rain. I squint through it for a better look. "Don't shoot!" It's me again. Another copy, though this one is at least 2 decades older. A copy of Robbie is with him, similarly aged. A girl in her 30s walks with them, a fearful expression on her face and her hands raised. It's my daughter. A sick copy at the least and aged up like the others. I throw my hands out, exasperated. "What do you want?" "Listen to me, you fool," my elder copy shouts back. "This is the real me, the real you, and this is the real Robbie, the real Robbie." He puts a hand on the copy of Robbie's shoulder, and his other on my daughter's. She stares at me wide-eyed. "He looks so young," she says. She calls over. "Dad, it's me. Do you remember? Please tell me you remember. Remember the trip we took to the beach? You took us to the coast on my 10th birthday. We saw dolphins." She reaches up to her neck and lifts a necklace with a smooth little shiny pebble attached. "You let me keep this pebble. We had it turned into a necklace." "Things are about to change," my copy says to me, walking ever closer. "Things beyond your understanding, and the truths of this hole barely scratch the surface. It's a passage, I think you've realized this. A passage to places beyond and between. Sometimes to other planes, yes, but the tunnels run deep. They loop back around." He slams his hands to his chest. "I'm babbling. I appreciate that this might not make any sense to you. But we are from the same loop. The same path. looped back around. I take a deep breath. I look this madman in the eyes. With the scent of the rain-washed pine and the drift of rifle smoke in my nose, I take aim, and I fire. Bang! My so-called future self drops to the ground. My daughter screams, and the elder copy of Robbie drops to his knees at the corpse. No, no, he cries, and I take him out as well. The copy of my daughter is the hardest. Shaking where she stands, she turns to stare at me, defiant, daring me to shoot in cold silence. It doesn't have to be this way, she says, her voice wavering. I chew my tongue, and then I call her bluff. Bang! Down she goes. Just another leaking corpse. Robbie stares at the ruined bodies. The trees rustle in the rain as the blasts of the rifle ring in our ears. He looks to me. How do you do it? He murmurs. How the fuck do you it? I rub a sleeve across my eyes. Do not allow anything to escape, I tell him. It's a rule for a reason. You do it so easily, he says quietly, the disgust in his voice quite clear. Is that what you think? I ask him. I turn to face him, my jaw set as the rain leaks from my chin. Tell me, Robbie. Tell me if what I am doing is wrong. Should I be letting these things and these abominations out into the world? And where do they come from exactly? If where they're coming from is so great, then why leave it all? If there's something worse that's pushing them away, then that's all the more incentive to just keep shooting. I don't know which one of these horrors is the worst. So, better safe than sorry. What if they have something important to tell us? He asks me. Important? Fuck 'em. It's all tricks and lies. The second I let my guard down, I am lost. And speaking of which, I raise the rifle and point it at his head. He backs away. Wait. Hold on. He laughs anxiously, then stops when he realizes that I am not kidding around. You've gone mad, he says simply. You've lost yourself in your head. It's me. It's Robbie. If the things that come out of the ground are benevolent, then why do they all lie? Robbie, why do they lie? I don't know what you're talking about. Oh, I think you do, my friend. I cock the rifle. I've enjoyed your company tonight, I really have. You were a strong imitation, I'll give you that. But you've missed a crucial piece of information. You always miss something. Robbie is dead. Long dead. Died 2 years ago. He died defending the people of this place from an abomination that rose out of that yonder hole. So I'll be seeing you now. Robbie's face contorts into shock and surprise. Please, he begins, and I put a bullet through his forehead with a loud bang. He crumples. Down he goes, just like the rest of them. That terrible black fluid pouring out and over the grass. Oversized, yet still only half-formed insect legs burst from his shoulders and neck, twitching in the rain. I lift my face to the sky and take a slow, deep breath. When Robbie first appeared to me this evening from through the trees, I was too surprised to react. It was a potentially fatal mistake, but for one reason or another, the copy did not use his rifle to shoot me. If he was going to use it to kill me, he could have done so in that very first instant. He didn't. So after that, I just played along, keeping an eye on him. As I said, it gets real lonely up here, and I miss that man a great deal. The rain's letting up a little now. I watch as black sludge begins bubbling up from the hole's entrance, and I return to my hut, sitting down with a sigh in my chair as water drips from the branches and into the bucket beside me. The corpses will have melted away by morning. There won't be any more visitors tonight. The black sludge means that the tunnel needs time to recharge. I reach for my mug and take a slow sip of cold, miserable tea. 3 months down. 3 more to go. A few weeks ago, my brother went on a camping trip with his friends. He would send me video updates every day, counting down the days until his return. On Tuesday, he stopped. I brushed it off and chalked it up to a weak signal in the forest. But I didn't even receive a text on Wednesday either. My guts wrenched as I lay in bed that night, thinking of what could have happened to him. The next morning, I made my way over to the police station. I tried to speak to them about my brother, but they dismissed it. Later that day, 2 rangers showed up at my house. They introduced themselves and spoke to me about my brother, but still, they dismissed the case and told me he would show up soon. The next day, I decided to head up to the forest and look for my brother. I thought that if the cops and the park rangers wouldn't help me, I would help myself. As I pulled up to the edge of the forest, I saw the 2 rangers getting out of their car. They exchanged worried glances as they saw me. "I thought we told you to stay put. Your brother will be back soon," they told me. "I'm going to look for Brian. You can't stop me," I responded. They reluctantly allowed me to tag along with them. Hours later, we were still walking through the woods, looking for a sign that anybody had even been in the forest. "Hey, look up there," the shorter ranger whispered to the taller one. They pointed at what looked like what once was a campsite. As we approached, we saw the campsite more clearly. It was in ruins, the tents wrecked, torn to shreds, and covered in blood. There were clothes everywhere and food sprawled across the ground. As I stepped forward, I heard a loud plastic crunch. I looked down at what was under my foot. It was a phone, Brian's phone. The screen was shattered and the battery was dead. It hadn't been used in days. Tears welled in my eyes as I grew worried that I would find Brian and see something I wouldn't want to. "That's crazy, they don't even live out here," I heard the rangers speaking faintly. "I know, but the hunting patterns match. There's nothing else it could be." The rangers spoke quietly as if I wasn't supposed to hear what they were saying. "What do you mean?" I interrupted them. "It's a grizzly attack, of course. Grizzlies live out here." I kind of chuckled as I spoke. My stomach dropped as I watched the 2 men face each other. I couldn't tell what their expressions meant, but I could tell it wasn't good. "It's not a grizzly." The tall ranger paused. "It's something else," he told me. I felt my body tense. I could feel the fear pumping through my veins as the rangers spoke. We continued, but this time it was different. Nobody spoke, and there was too much tension and fear in the air. Soon we reached a nearby cave. I wandered in, mindlessly following the 2 rangers. I gasped loudly as I tripped. My hands scraped the rocky surface below in an attempt to catch myself, and I felt the blood start to drip out of the cuts on my palms and knees. Quickly, the 2 rangers helped me up before turning their flashlight towards me. I slowly looked down to see what I tripped on, and I saw the lifeless body of my brother. His clothes were torn apart and drenched in blood. I opened my mouth to scream, but one of the rangers quickly covered my mouth with his hand. "Listen," he told me. I heard a faint growl from the other side of the cave. Soon the growl grew louder. We began hearing footsteps. The rangers pulled me aside, still covering my mouth as we hid behind a rock. The growls became scarily loud and the footsteps were so close. I closed my eyes tightly and hoped everything would go away, but when I opened them, I saw it. The tall, dark figure stood on deer-like legs. The body was rotting and its ribs were exposed. Its arms were long and dragged across the ground as it walked, and its sharp nails looked like daggers. The face of the creature was grotesque. It looked similar to the skull of a moose. Its teeth resembled stalactites. It had huge yellow eyes, and its bony spine had a trail of thin spikes of brown fur. I felt sick looking at it. As I closed my eyes again, I took a deep breath as I waited for it to pass. When I opened my eyes again, it had stopped. It quickly turned to look at me. "Run now!" the rangers shouted. It's been 3 days since the creature in the cave saw me and the rangers. I've been hiding in a small hunting cabin with one of the rangers. The other ranger was caught by the creature. I didn't dare to look back as I heard the wails and blood-curtailing shrieks of the park ranger. The cabin we found is musty. It's quaint and probably abandoned, but the ranger and I have made ourselves comfortable. He spent the first day carving sigils into the walls and floors. He tells me it's to protect us from the creature, that the creature can't come close to the cabin while the sigils remain intact. I don't know when I can leave. The ranger says we need to wait until its hunting season is over, until the creature is in hibernation. He says we made it angry when it saw us in its nest, that the creature wants us dead. He says the creature is smart, smarter than me, and it's a better hunter than any human could be. He says we have no choice but to wait, that if we don't, we will surely die. At night, I hear screams and cries. Each night, it's been different voices. The ranger says the creature mimics human voices and tries to lure us out. I often can hear the creature stepping as close as he can to the cabin. He's careful. I don't think he knows we can hear him. The ranger tells me not to worry, that the creature is stalking his prey, but he can't get to us. But I'm worried. I worry we run out of food, that the sigils fail, that we leave the cabin early and the creature will get us. I've spent my life researching the things that live in the dark that nobody knows about. He tells me, "Trust me when I tell you, we will survive this." He continues, "What is it?" I ask, my voice trembling with fear. I wasn't sure I wanted to know the answer. "It's a Wendigo." He paused. "They're native. They don't usually live in these woods, but here we are." He shrugs. "You're so calm about this," I respond. He turns to look at me as he pours himself a glass of the whiskey he found. "This stuff just doesn't scare me anymore," he explained. "We're running out of water, and the ranger said he would leave at sunrise and be back by noon. It's around 10 a.m. now, and I think the sigils are failing. The creature returned, but he's much closer now. I hear the snarls and the footsteps. I hear his claws dragging across the wood of the cabin. In a panic, I grab a shotgun off the wall. I've never shot one before, but I hope that if it needs to, adrenaline will take over. I can tell footsteps have grown louder, but I can barely hear them over the sound of my heavy breathing. It's almost noon now. The creature is leaving, heading back to its cave, I guess. I hope the ranger is all right. I don't want to die here." The ranger is back. He returned with 9-inch gashes across his shoulder blades. He has blood running down his back, and his shirt is torn and dirty. "He's close. He found me in the woods, but I hid from him," he said, gasping for breath. He glanced around quickly, searching for something to sanitize his wound. Just then he paused. "The sigils," he stuttered as he spoke. "What did you do to them?" He questioned me. "Nothing. I didn't touch them," I shouted in response. He ran frantically, looking for a knife. "Did that thing come back?" He yelled the question at me. I could hear the panic in his voice. "Yes, it got closer this time," I told him. "Fuck," he muttered under his breath. Just then, I heard the footsteps of the creature. It was approaching rapidly. "Stay quiet," the ranger ordered as he loaded a shotgun. We sat in silence as we hid from the creature in the bathroom. My heart pounded as I felt the creature scratching at the wood of the cabin, trying desperately to get in. I wasn't a religious man, but I prayed to God, maybe for the first time in my life. My body froze as the creature broke through the door, searching for me and the ranger, tearing the cabin apart as he made his way closer to the bathroom. The ranger began to shoot the Wendigo, in a desperate attempt to try to save our lives. That's the last thing I remember. I guess I passed out after that. I'm now in a dark, unfamiliar, cold, and dirty place. I can't see much. The pitch black surrounds me. It's cold and damp. It's empty, but it fills the room. I haven't moved since I've gotten here. I'm too scared to. It smells like rotting flesh. The scent burns when I inhale. I know where I am, but I don't know where I am. I know I'm in the creature's cavern, but I'm clueless about my whereabouts. The ranger must be dead. I know he would have found me if he were alive. I'm alone. The creature will come back, and I will be waiting here for his return. I don't think I want to escape anymore. I'd rather die. What's the point of living? I have nothing left to live for. I sit back and think about when the creature will return, what I will do. Then I hear the gentle steps of another person. Maybe the ranger was alive. My eyes widened, trying to see who was coming for me, but I couldn't. The darkness wouldn't let me. "Hello?" A weary voice called out. I could sense the fear in her voice as she spoke. She continued to approach the cavern. I soon saw the dim flashlight she carried with her. Her footsteps grew louder as I saw her outline turn the corner. I widened my eyes as an attempt to make her figure out more clearly. "Help!" My raspy voice called out to her. I heard her gasp in shock that I had actually responded. She quickly began to search for me in the dark. "Where are you?" she asked me, panic spilling from her lips. I tried to raise myself from the dusty ground in an attempt to make myself more visible to her. Suddenly, the light of her flashlight was blinding my eyes, shining across my face as she examined me, stepping closer cautiously. I sat there impatiently as she questioned me, asked about why I'm here, why I'm covered in blood and bruises. Most of her questions I didn't know the answer to myself. I wanted to leave, but she wouldn't let me yet. She was still weary of me. "Please, he's going to come back soon," I urged her. I was pleading with her for my freedom. "Who's he?" she asked. "Let me leave and I'll tell you. Please, it's not safe," I told her. She glanced towards the pathway in which she came. Her flashlight illuminated the exit. She looked back down at me. Pity and unease covered her face. "Well," she paused. "Okay," she stuttered as she spoke. I knew she was reluctant, but I was grateful for her kindness nonetheless. She hesitantly took my hand to help me up before leading me away from what was once my final resting place. The walk out of the cavern was short, though without her flashlight would be impossible to navigate. However, our walk through the forest kept going for what felt like hours. By now it must have been noon. The sun was shining down on us, and I could feel the mixture of dehydration and heat stroke starting to affect me. "Why were you in there?" the woman asked me suddenly. I perked up at her question. "The creature did," I told her. She nodded at me in response. There was a confused look on her face. "Right, I get that, but what is the creature exactly?" she asked me again. I shrugged. I looked around cautiously. I was scared to mention the name. "A Wendigo," I stuttered nervously. Her eyes widened in shock. "We're near the edge of the forest!" She spoke up finally. We had been silent for a long time. "Good," I said. I saw it out of the corner of my eye. I froze. My heart began racing. I was filled with fear. I couldn't speak before I started to run. I heard the woman following close behind me. I didn't know where I was going. I was heading in the direction she was leading me and hoping for the best. The roar of the best haunted me as I saw the exit of the forest. I saw a road and wanted the relief washed over me like a wave, but it didn't. I did not feel relieved. I had now to carry this burden with me forever. 2 lives were taken in order to save me. I regret everything. I miss my brother. I wish the creature took me instead of the rangers. I wish I could finally be with my brother. "Was that it?" the girl sputtered out, her jaw wide open in terror. The loud cry of the creature had not only haunted me, but scarred her. We stayed in silence as we walked back to find my car. We stayed silent as we walked into the police station. We stayed silent as I watched her wave goodbye as I saw her walk down the streets of our town. I wish our fate upon nobody. My friends and I were very into spooky adventures. It was a hobby that originated in our high school years. We started playing with an Ouija board at some cemetery at night, and like addicts looking for a bigger high, we moved on to exploring abandoned buildings that were supposedly haunted. With the exception of a very unsettling atmosphere at most places, we were never in any real danger. That is, until our last adventure. It had been some time since we had the chance to go on any adventure. Once we graduated from high school, some of us moved away for college, others started families, and others simply fell off the face of the earth. A while back, I was contacted by my best friend in high school, and after catching up, he proposed a trip to a national park. Usually, this sort of trip would actually be a nice outdoor experience with friends, but Mike had specifically picked the national park for a reason: the disproportionate number of people that go missing there a year. This tidbit of information immediately made me pause. We were all in a way adrenaline junkies, always looking for that next scare. The difference this time was that we weren't going to explore an abandoned building or play in a graveyard. We were going to visit a place where real people go missing and are never heard from again. Mike, being the silver-tongued devil as always, managed to convince me that we would be safe camping at the park and that a handful of our group had vast experience in the outdoors. Even though I should have made the sane decision of hanging up the phone and going back to my daily mundane life, I was out on the road 2 days later and was meeting up with my friends at the park visitor center. The first thing I noticed was the immense beauty of the park. We had not even begun to explore the area, and it was already one of the most breathtaking places I'd ever laid eyes on. The second thing I noticed was the bulletin board next to the parking lot. It was overflowing with missing person posters. While we had begun to unload all our camping equipment, a park ranger came out of the visitor center's office. He looked tired, like he had not gotten a minute of sleep in the past week, but was trying hard to fake a friendly demeanor. "Hello, everyone. What brings you to our park?" he said in a tired voice. Mike engaged him in conversation. "We're just here for a camping weekend, sir." The park ranger looked saddened at the words coming out of Mike's mouth. "Yeah, it looks that way. Listen, you folk don't look like the misinformed kind, and I know you've seen our bulletin boards. People have a tendency to go missing in this park, and we are very short on staff, being I'm the only one on shift. If you insist on camping in this area, don't go too deep into the woods and stay on the paths. If you get lost out here, well, we don't have a good track record of finding nice folk like you." The park ranger didn't really stick around waiting for our reply. He went about his day, and we just went about ours. Our group, composed of 6 people, 3 men and 3 women, walked for a few miles looking for a good camping spot within the woods. I was initially against being so far away from our vehicles until Mike and one of his friends, Alex, pulled out hunting rifles from their bags. If there was anything dangerous in these woods, we would be surely safe, I thought. After a long walk, we found a spot that was perfect for our campsite, and we began setting our tents up. By nightfall, we had multiple tents around a campfire, and we began drinking a few beers and reminiscing about our old high school adventures. Around midnight, Mike had a terrible idea that he had joyfully proposed to the rest of us. We should try and find some of those missing people out here. Some of them would just be bones by now. Nobody was drunk enough to go exploring the dark woods in search of ghosts with the exception of Mike and his friend Alex. When the rest of our group inevitably rejected his proposal, he took his hunting rifle, his friend, and Brenda, the woman he was dating, and drunkenly set off for a scary adventure in the woods. As they left and we could no longer hear their steps in the woods, I remembered the park ranger's warning, "Stay on the paths," which they most definitely did not do. My worries were validated hours later when they had not returned to the campsite. We tried reaching them on their phones, but we had no service this deep into the woods. After some debate, we decided to head back to the visitor center and get help from the park ranger. Regardless of his previous warnings, we would have a better chance at finding our friends with his help and not go blindly searching in the woods and inevitably get lost as well. We only took what was necessary with us, some flashlights, and the other hunting rifle Alex left at the camp. About 30 minutes into walking back to the visitor center, we noticed something unsettling. All the wildlife around us seemed to go dead quiet. It seemed like our footsteps echoed throughout the woods for miles. From my very limited experience in nature, I could remember that when the woods went quiet, a predator was nearby. Just when I was about to consider the sinister thought, a scream broke the silence. "Help!" It sounded like Mike was crying out somewhere not too far from us. "Help me!" We started to follow the screams for help, which led us further and further away from the path. A few dozen feet deeper into the woods, we found a flickering flashlight that had been cracked and barely functioning. A few feet in front of us, we could hear Mike. "Help me." Mike sounded weaker this time, but something was off. His voice sounded wrong this time, like someone was trying to imitate how a human spoke, and Mike's voice at the same time. "Mike, are you hurt, buddy?" I said, concerned, but not moving an inch forward until I got a reply. "Yes, come, help," Mike said, maybe 20 feet in front of us. He looked like he was on his knees. "Where are Alex and Brenda?" I asked while signaling Josh to ready the rifle he was carrying. "They're here. We found them." I pointed my flashlight towards Mike. His body was on his knees, his head was slumped forward, and his shirt was covered in dirt and bathed in blood. I knew that whatever was talking to us only a few feet in front of us was not Mike. He had been dead for hours. "They were so damn tasty." The voice stopped trying to imitate Mike. Mike's head raised up to where we could see his lifeless eyes rolled to the back of his head, and somehow, his dislocated jaw was moving by itself, like some sort of demonic ventriloquist and dummy show. Something large and grotesque emerged from behind Mike's corpse. It had one of its inhuman hands lodged into the back of Mike's skull, using him as a puppet. It wasted no time to drop on all fours and rush towards us. Josh fired a shot at it and missed. Before our reflexes could kick in, it had crashed into us, throwing Amber and I in different directions, but making sure it got Josh first as he was the biggest threat with a weapon. I landed a few feet from Amber, who had landed badly and broken her leg. I got her up, and we shuffled as fast as Amber could go while the creature ripped chunks off Josh. We made it maybe 50 meters before we were knocked to the ground, and Amber was pulled away into the dark woods, screaming all the way. I got to my feet again and sprinted faster and further than I had ever gone before. I stopped hearing Amber's wails of pain, and knew that thing would catch up to me in a matter of moments, no matter how fast the surge of adrenaline would make me run. I fell in the darkness, longer than I should. There must have been some sort of cliff I failed to see. I landed on something hard and soft at the same time. I couldn't see a thing after I dropped my flashlight. I could only smell the terrible putrid stench of death all around me. I could hear dozens of flies buzzing around me, and it made me froze in terror. As my vision focused in the darkness, I could see the hundreds of bodies around me. I had fallen into a mass grave. None of the corpses were complete from what I could tell, and some of them I recognized. Amber and Alex were among the piles of dead, and one particular body I could recognize as the park ranger that we had met in the morning. I had to swallow my scream as a couple more bodies were thrown into the pile. The creature was actively looking through the pile for any signs of me. I had to play dead until the creature left in defeat. I waited what felt like an eternity until the first rays of light broke through the trees. I felt sick to my stomach as I tried crawling over the dead bodies and out of the pit. I cried for my friends and cried some more when my foot got stuck in one of the bodies. It was Mike, and my foot had gone through where his stomach used to be. Eventually, I crawled out of the mass grave and found my way back to the path we originally used to get to our campsite. A few hours of walking, and I reached the visitors center where our vehicles awaited our return. I got into my car and fell into a catatonic state for a few minutes. After I snapped out of it, I drove away as the feeling of still being watched was too overwhelming. As I saw a car driving towards the visitors center. A man, a woman, and 2 young children in the back seat. I wish I could say that I stopped and warned them of the impending doom that awaited them. But I drove. I didn't look back. I'm sure the first thing you think of when you hear toll booth is the great inconvenience of your trip being interrupted to be charged a few bucks just to pass through. The mental image most of you might conjure is a clogged up freeway with lines of cars packed together, waiting to pay and move on. I can imagine the people who work at those booths find it even more boring than you do. The one I work at couldn't be further from the stereotype. The toll booth I operate is situated on a small country road that curves a few times along its path through the woods surrounding it, far away from any bustling highway. The booth itself is more like a little wooden shack, with chipped paint and an old sign that reads 25C, an amount I don't believe has changed since sometime in the 50s. I guess that's when they decided to stop pretending it was a normal toll booth. Its only accessory is the barrier arm I can flip up or down. The interior is simple, with a single chair and a light on the ceiling, the only light besides the moon for miles. It only has one operator on any given night, Most nights, that's me. On the surface, it doesn't make sense why our local government would pay someone to sit out in the middle of nowhere to operate a booth that makes no money. And believe me, they pay well. But if you spent a single night out there, you would understand why. No, there isn't a sudden influx of 1,000 cars waiting to pay their tolls at 3 a.m. What we protect by keeping this booth running is worth far more than any monetary cost could make up for. In my town, the job of operating the lonely booth is one that is highly respected and rarely spoken of. In fact, it's something of an unspoken rule that you keep private any conversations about the booth, the road, or anything related. Everyone around here knows there's something off about this place. Almost everyone has seen something they can't explain or something they wish they hadn't. A lot of rural towns have their own urban legends. Most of the time, their residents embrace the myths. I suspect it's because they all know it's a myth, save for a few crazies. Our town is the opposite. We keep quiet about the things we've seen. The most we can do around here is to steer people clear of the road and hope nothing strays from it. The last we wanted was for the rest of the world to find out, and I suspect we're not the only ones. You see, our town is doing far better than most in our area. Our infrastructure never seems to crumble or degrade, our public schools are well funded, and no one is ever stuck looking for work. The reason this is noteworthy is that our town isn't exactly in the most prosperous region of America. This money is coming from somewhere, and it's not from our little property taxes. I've got a suspicion that the feds, or someone else, is dumping money into our town, and that they're keeping tabs on our little toll booth situation as well. I know this all sounds ridiculous now, but once you get a better idea of my job, and of recent events, I think you'll understand. As I said, the booth only has one operator each night, a tradition that goes as far back as we've been a town. Each week we hold a private meeting at our town hall. At this meeting are all current toll booth attendants and any former ones who can make it. Most of the time the meetings don't last longer than 15 minutes, but after the emergency meeting I called a few weeks ago, we've held them every day, and they've been taking a lot longer. The reason for which you will know soon enough. I suppose this is a good time to explain what happens at the toll booth and the road it sits on. You'll need to know my rules. Rule 1. The booth does not need to be attended during the day. Not much happens at the booth when the sun is up, but the attendant for the night, which is usually me, must be at the booth an hour before sunset and stay an hour after sunrise. The attendant for the night is not to leave the booth at any time during their shift, for any reason. Transportation isn't an issue because either the sheriff or one of the deputies always gives us a ride to the booth at night and a ride back to town in the morning. Rule 2. No cell phone, radio, or other electronic or communication device is allowed while operating the booth at night. The only thing running on electricity that a booth attendant is allowed to have is a flashlight. If you happen to bring a device accidentally, shut it off, store it inside the booth, and pray that it doesn't turn itself back on. Leaving it outside the booth is not an option. Should your device turn itself on inside of the booth, your next best bet is to destroy it. This sounds like a drastic measure, but I've made this mistake before. I lasted about an hour before I couldn't take the screams coming from my phone and stomped it into oblivion. Haven't made the mistake of taking it with me again. I've never been told what the screams and other noises are, but I do know that past attendants have heard the same thing. Rule 3. Rare as they are, cars may approach the gate at any time during the night. A common trait among those who end up on this road at night is confusion. The attendant's job is to decide whether they will be let through or turned away. The driver, along with confusion, may express other emotions. They may be distressed, angry, paranoid, or fearful. Try to calm them down and put their minds at ease as best you can. Once you believe they are ready, you will simply ask them to pay their toll. One of two outcomes will occur. If the driver has no notable reaction, questions you, or hands you a regular quarter, you must leave the barrier arm down and turn them away. Do whatever is necessary to try and make them leave. If they threaten you or attempt to drive through anyway, you can let them know you will be calling the police, even though you have no means of calling them. This scenario is unlikely because no modern navigation system would bring them down this road. All of the locals know not to use it, and it would be unusual for an outsider to learn about it. Though we have, on occasion, had to deal with a few lost travelers. Most of the time, they are compliant. Get them off the road as soon as possible and direct them towards town where they can get their footing. Above all else, they cannot pass through the gate. However, if you ask them to pay their toll, another outcome is possible, and unfortunately, the most common. They'll come to a sudden realization, as evidenced by their facial expression. It's as if they remember something, slowly reaching into their pocket and pulling out a black coin. They know they'll have to give it to you to pass. Some accept their fate graciously, others cry, but they all follow the road once the barrier arm is lifted. Around the corner, they drive, never to be seen again. In my first months working here, I was confused as to who these people were. I wondered what it was they knew, how they got these coins in the first place, or what the coins were. All I knew was to leave it in the booth to be picked up by the next shift. This was until I happened to be watching the local news one morning after I got home. They talked about a man who was killed in a car accident the night before and showed a picture of his face. A face I had seen only hours before, puzzled and afraid as he asked me where he was and what was going on. When I asked him for his toll, he froze, slowly reached into his coat pocket with a quivering hand, and pulled out a black coin before placing it in mine. He gripped the steering wheel and faced forward, knowing he had to pass through and drive around the corner. He knew where he was going. Sitting in my living room that morning, recounting the events of the last hours, I realized that I was the last person to see that man. He was already dead, just passing through, as were the dozens I had seen before, and the countless more I knew I would see. It was the moment I realized the road was some kind of path to somewhere beyond. As for this rule, I don't believe anyone has ever stopped the dead from passing when their time has come. I don't think anyone ever could. It's something so surreal that in the moment, all you can do is let autopilot take over and continue with your duties as you were told. But as for letting the living through, I'm afraid it has been done before. A few decades back, a visitor from out of town was passing through town. Back then, he didn't have a phone to give him directions, so he had to go off a map. Even with a map, I'm certain he didn't know of the road because it was never put on any map. My best guess is that he happened to see it, and figured it could be some sort of a shortcut. When he approached the gate, he was, of course, turned away by the toll booth attendant, but he wasn't taking no for an answer. The man got violent with the attendant, pushing him over and raising the arm himself before driving through. This hadn't happened before, at least as far as any of the past attendants of the booth who were still alive could recollect. No one was sure what would happen next. Back then, they only knew the rules, not the consequences, but they didn't have to wait long to find out. The next night, the same man in the same car rolled up to the booth. When asked for his toll, this time he presented a black coin. He seemed to have lost his memory of the night before, only knowing that he needed to pass through, but not why. This has continued every night for the last several decades. Each night he pulls up, confused as to why he's here and needs to pass, and forgetting each time. Each night he gives us a coin. Each time he passes on, driving around the bend into the woods, not seen until the next night. He never ages and his appearance never changes. Sometimes he even says the same exact thing as the night before. Other times he expresses a sense that he's been here before, and that everything feels familiar, like he almost remembers sometimes. His fate is one I wouldn't wish upon my worst enemies. Dead, but not being allowed to move on and never remembering why you're there. Living the same moment night after night until who knows when. His story is one that reminds me of the importance of our job here, but not the only one. Rule 4. At some random point in the night, you may hear something moving through the trees. Something big. Sometimes they emerge from the woods, other times they'll be coming down the road. Try not to be afraid. No harm is coming your way. Quite the opposite. However, I can see how this would be hard to believe. In any case, you need to raise the arm and let them through. I remember the first time I saw them. I could hear a clop somewhere down the road, coming towards the booth like a horse galloping. I rose to my feet and grabbed my flashlight, intrigued. I remember hoping it wasn't someone's horse. I had never been told what to do in that scenario. When I did point my flashlight at the road, I nearly had a heart attack at the sight before me. a bull moose was approaching with a brisk walk. Of course, I was warned of this, but the details I was given were vague. All I was told was that a moose might approach the gate, and I was supposed to let it through. I wasn't told that this thing stands at around 9 or 10 feet at the shoulder, or that its fur is so dark I couldn't see it without my flashlight save for the massive antlers, which are white as snow in contrast. The only other part of its body clearly visible from afar were its eyes, which shone with a small speck of white light, glowing in the darkness. I screamed and retreated to my booth, tempted to run off into the night and abandon my post. Fortunately, the moose slowed its pace and eventually stopped in front of the barrier arm. This calmed me down, and I slowly raised it, watching as the moose approached to pass. As it did, I noticed the halter and reins on its head. I followed them up, only to meet another set of eyes, identical to the moose's, towering over me. Again, I yelled, but contained my volume when I realized whoever or whatever this was on top of the moose was making eye contact with me as they passed. This figure was dark, if not darker than the moose it rode on. Something akin to a shadow. Just like everyone in their cars, they walked down the road, beyond the bend and out of sight. I had to sit down for half an hour before I stopped shaking. Needless to say, I wasn't very happy those finer details had been left out. Only after my shift and expressing my frustration was I told more. Apparently this hunter and his moose have been around a long time. So long that no attendant alive today can remember a time without them. Some believe they've been here for the past couple 100 years or more, possibly as long as the strange road and the booth have been around. What we do know is that they aren't bound to the road like the others. At our town hall, we possess a written account of the hunter and his mount riding right through town in the middle of the night back in 1919. To this day, a few residents have seen the moose while they're driving at night. You may be wondering why I refer to the figure on the moose's back as the hunter. Well, that's what us attendants call him. Every so often he and his moose will arrive at the booth, dragging a corpse behind them. When I say corpse, I don't mean an animal, or even a human for that matter. I mean abominations out of your wildest nightmares. Things that send a shiver down your spine and make you want to vomit at the same time. Things you would expect to find talked about in a religious text when the end of days comes. The hunter drags these things down the road and around the curve. I can't be certain of anything, but if you ask me, he's taking them back to some sort of afterlife, or underworld. Maybe it's the same place the dead go when they drive around the curve. Or maybe somewhere in the road is a pathway to many different places. I couldn't tell you. What I believe, like the other attendants and anyone who knows about the hunter and his moose, is that they're here to protect us. Whatever these things are that he's taking with him aren't supposed to be here in the first place, and he's just here to set things right. I only noticed my heavy breathing after all was quiet again. It took me an hour to work up the courage to leave the tree line and return to my booth. When I did, I noticed the tooth from the clown lying on the road and collected it. Fortunately for me, the rest of my shift was uneventful. Unfortunately, the hunter never returned with the clown. When the sheriff picked me up at sunrise, I told him to hurry to the town hall for an emergency meeting. During the drive, I contacted everyone else and told them to get there as soon as possible. At the meeting, I presented the tooth and gave an account of what I had just witnessed. There was a mix of emotions. None of the other attendants had ever seen something escape from the hunter before, and none knew what it meant. The agreed-upon action was to wait at least a week. It's unusual to not see the hunter and his moose for more than a week, so we figured he would catch the clown in the next couple of days and all would be sorted. I dearly wish that was what happened. A day later, a video surfaced on the internet from the town over. It showed a pair of deer antlers sticking out above the tops of trees as the man recording was driving. A few days after that, another video. This one was recorded by a woman who awoke in the middle of the night to laughter outside. Halfway through the video, you can see the antlers and part of the hat outside of a second-story window. The woman recording didn't notice, but commenters on the video sure did. Last week, someone halfway across the state uploaded a grainy photo of a black moose on a hill and a clearing between the trees, far off in the distance. These are just the ones I've seen. Now you can see why we've been having meetings every week. I can tell we're not the only ones in a panic either. Strangers started showing up around town, and not the kind that are just passing through. They try their best to fit in, but they stick out like a sore thumb. The dead giveaway is when they show up to our bars and diners, striking up a conversation before asking folk what they've seen around here lately, asking about the booth and the strange road. In the last week or so, they've stopped trying so hard to hide it. Black government SUVs have been crowding the parking spaces downtown. We kept the tooth in the town hall along with every other document and record we have about the booth, and now it's all missing. It's clear that whatever happened that night wasn't supposed to, and we weren't the only ones who noticed. I didn't work last night, but the attendant who did had a lot to report this morning in our meeting. The feds drove out to the booth and took a look around. He pleaded with them not to drive through, but in response, they told him they already knew why they shouldn't. Something we weren't expecting. It's only a matter of time before they come for me. I suppose I'll tell them the truth when the time comes. As much as we like to keep it a secret in our town, the genie is out of the bottle. I figured I would at least tell all of you before the feds. Every one of you should know what's out there. As for me, I'll keep watching the booth at night. Sticking to my duties is about all I can do. Still, I'll be keeping up with all of the developments that I can. I can only guess based on the posts I've strung together, but it looks like the clown is still on the move, and our hunter close behind. I can only pray that he catches it soon. In the meantime, if you hear strange laughter in your backyard at night, stay inside.